After the 15th specialist stepped away from the bedside and murmured that there was nothing more, the mansion fell into a silence sharper than any gunmetal threat. In the shadowed suite, monitors blinked like warning lights while bodyguards held their breath, waiting for a sign from the Mafia boss that might never come. They had flown in experts from abroad, spent fortunes on tests, and the same verdict returned: irreversible, untreatable, finished. But down the hall, the woman who scrubbed marble floors and changed sheets noticed what the professionals overlooked: a faint, repeating pattern in the symptoms, timed to the household's rituals, the pills, the meals, the scent of a cleaning solvent. She followed the trail through a locked cabinet, a mislabeled bottle, a schedule crossed out in haste, and one tiny adjustment no one had tried. When she finally spoke, fear met hope, and the missing step clicked neatly into place. The machines breathed for him now. Vincent Ferraro lay motionless in the center of a medical theater, worth more than most people's homes, his body connected to devices that hummed with the quiet efficiency of Swiss engineering. The private suite on the 42nd floor of Manhattan General overlooked a city that still whispered his name in boardrooms and back alleys. But here, surrounded by Italian marble and fresh orchids, he was just another failing body defying the best medicine money could buy. Doctor. Charles Mancini adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses and studied the latest blood panel with the same expression he'd worn for the past 6 weeks. Controlled frustration masquerading as a clinical concern. 15 specialists had rotated through this room, each carrying theories that crumbled under scrutiny and recommendations that led nowhere. His white cell count is erratic, but not indicative of infection, Dr. Sarah Chen, the hematologist, murmured to the small crowd of physicians gathered around Vincent's chart. Liver enzymes are elevated, kidneys are struggling, but there's no clear pathology. The neurologist, Dr. James Whitfield, shook his head. Cognitive function remains intact when he's conscious, which rules out most degenerative conditions. The seizures appear random, no pattern we can establish. Sebastian Romano stood in the corner, his tailored suit immaculate despite the early hour. Vincent's right hand for 15 years, Sebastian had been a constant presence since Vincent's collapse at the penthouse 3 months ago. His dark eyes tracked every conversation, every test result, every whispered consultation with the intensity of a man whose entire world depended on the figure in that bed. "What about environmental factors?" Sebastian asked, his voice carrying just enough concern to sound genuine. Vincent worked, in demanding conditions, stress, exposure to various business associates. Dr. Mancini nodded gravely. "We've tested for every toxin, every pathogen, every genetic marker. The symptoms suggest systemic organ failure, but the progression is unlike anything in current literature." Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, dawn broke over Manhattan in shades of gold and amber, casting long shadows across the medical equipment. The city below was already moving, early commuters, delivery trucks, the endless pulse of commerce that Vincent had once controlled with phone calls and handshakes. Now he couldn't control his own heartbeat without pharmaceutical intervention. "How long?" Sebastian's question hung in the air like smoke. The doctors exchanged glances. Dr. Mancini cleared his throat. "At this rate of deterioration, weeks, maybe less." Sebastian nodded slowly, his face a mask of appropriate grief. "I'll handle the arrangements. Vincent's businesses need continuity. He'd want that." As the medical team filed out for their morning rounds, Sebastian remained. He approached Vincent's bedside, studying the pale face that had once commanded fear and respect across 3 states. The man who had built an empire from nothing, who had survived attempts on his life and hostile takeovers, was being defeated by something invisible, something that struck from within. Sebastian reached into his leather portfolio and withdrew a small, expensive bottle, imported lotion, the kind Vincent's mother had used when Sebastian was just a kid hanging around the old neighborhood. He placed it carefully on the nightstand, adjusting the position until the label faced Vincent's pillow perfectly. "Rest easy, Vincent," Sebastian whispered, his voice barely audible above the mechanical breathing of the ventilator. "I'll take care of everything." In the hallway, The overnight cleaning crew was beginning their shift. Ava Giordano pushed her cart past the VIP suites, her steps practiced and invisible. She'd learned long ago that being unremarkable was a form of protection in places where power gathered. But as she passed room 4247, something made her pause. Through the partially open door, she glimpsed the man in the bed, Vincent Ferraro, whose name appeared in newspapers and whose presence could empty restaurants or fill them, depending on his mood. Even unconscious, even diminished, there was something about him that commanded attention. But it wasn't Vincent that caught her eye. It was the man standing over him, Sebastian Romano, placing something on the nightstand with the careful precision of a ritual. The way Sebastian positioned the bottle, checked it twice, then stepped back to admire his handiwork, struck Ava as odd. She'd seen grief. She'd seen devotion. This felt different. The machines continued their rhythmic chorus, marking time in a room where time itself had become the enemy. And in the growing light of morning, 3 lives hung in a balance none of them yet understood. The powerful man fighting an invisible war, the loyal friend positioning himself for inheritance, and the invisible woman who noticed what others missed. The countdown had begun. Hello everyone, thanks for joining us. Hit the like button and let us know in the comments how you liked the story and what city you're watching from. Let's get back to it. Ava Giordano had learned to measure her life in night shifts and small victories. The uniform hung loose on her thin frame, navy blue polyester that smelled of industrial detergent and other people's choices. She'd worn designer lab coats once, back when her name appeared on research papers and her voice carried weight in university conferences. That felt like another lifetime, another woman entirely. Now she pushed her cleaning cart through the sterile corridors of Manhattan General at 3 in the morning. Invisible to everyone except the security cameras that tracked her movement through the hospital's maze of power and desperation. The work wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. In a world that had stripped everything else away, steady meant survival. Her phone buzzed against her hip. A text from Lily, her younger sister, sent from the cramped studio apartment they shared in Queens. Working late on my biochemistry thesis. Coffee ran out again. Love you. Ava smiled, despite her exhaustion. Lily was everything Ava had been at 22. Brilliant, determined, convinced that science could solve the world's problems. The tuition bills for Lily's biomedicine program consumed most of Ava's paycheck, but watching her sister thrive made every double shift worth it. The scandal still followed Ava like a shadow. 3 years ago, she'd been Dr. Ava Giordano, senior researcher at the prestigious Hartwell Institute for Forensic Sciences. Her specialty was toxicology, the dark art of detecting poisons that others couldn't find. She'd built her reputation on cases that stumped veteran investigators, unraveling the chemical fingerprints left by killers who thought they were too clever to catch. Then came the Morrison case, a pharmaceutical executive found dead in his penthouse, apparently from a heart attack. The family hired Hartwell to investigate irregularities in the autopsy. Ava discovered traces of an experimental compound, something that shouldn't have existed outside military research facilities. When she dug deeper, she found a web of corruption connecting her own institute to the company that manufactured the compound. She tried to do the right thing, presented her findings to the board, demanded a formal investigation. Instead, she found herself accused of falsifying evidence, fabricating results, and violating research protocols. The smear campaign was swift and surgical. Colleagues who'd praised her work suddenly questioned her methods, publications retracted her papers, and professional doors slammed shut across the industry. Dr. Marcus Webb, the Institute's director, had delivered the final blow personally. "Your reputation is toxic now, Ava. No legitimate laboratory will touch you. Find something else to do with your life." Something else turned out to be night shifts in the same hospital where she'd once consulted on complex poisoning cases. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd gone from analyzing toxins in state-of-the-art labs to scrubbing their residue from toilet bowls and trash cans. But Ava's mind hadn't forgotten how to see patterns, how to notice details that others missed. As she worked, she observed the way certain patients received different levels of care based on their insurance, how medications sometimes went missing from secured carts, the pharmaceutical representatives who visited doctors with expensive gifts and left with signed contracts. The hospital was an ecosystem of secrets, and Ava had learned to read its hidden language. She pushed her cart past the VIP wing, remembering the strange scene she'd witnessed earlier in Vincent Ferraro's room. Sebastian Romano's careful placement of that bottle had felt like watching someone complete a ritual. Precise, intentional, meaningful in ways she couldn't yet understand. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a notification from the credit union. Lily's tuition payment was due in 2 weeks. The balance in their joint account was exactly $73 short. Ava paused outside room 4247, studying the nameplate that read, Ferraro V. Through the gap in the door she could see him sleeping, surrounded by millions of dollars worth of medical technology that seemed powerless to help him. The most feared man on the East Coast, reduced to counting heartbeats on a monitor. She thought about power, about how quickly it could disappear. 3 years ago she'd been untouchable, brilliant, respected, secure. Now she was worried about $73 and whether her sister would have to drop out of school. The machines beeped softly in the darkness, marking time for a man who'd run out of it, while Ava Giordano, invisible by choice and circumstance, continued her rounds in a world that had forgotten she'd ever been anyone else. Vincent Ferraro had built his empire on 3 principles: control the information, control the outcome, and never let anyone see you bleed. For 37 years, those rules had served him well, from running numbers in Brooklyn as a teenager to commanding a network of legitimate businesses that stretched from Boston to Miami. Vincent had learned that power wasn't about what you could destroy. It was about what you could protect. And Vincent Ferraro protected everything that mattered to him with the methodical precision of a chess grandmaster who thought 12 moves ahead. The penthouse office on the 58th floor of the Ferraro building had been his command center for 2 decades. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of Manhattan that reminded visitors exactly how far they were from street level. The mahogany desk had belonged to his grandfather, brought over from Sicily in 1923. Behind it hung a single photograph, not of Vincent, not of any business triumph, but of a small woman in a nurse's uniform, smiling despite the exhaustion in her eyes. Maria Ferraro had worked double shifts at Brooklyn Methodist Hospital to put Vincent through school. She died when he was 25, her heart giving out after years of 12-hour days and worry about her son's increasingly dangerous associations. Vincent had been in the middle of closing a deal that would double his territory when the call came. He'd finished the meeting first, then driven to the hospital where she lay covered by a white sheet. He'd built everything since then in her honor, or maybe in her memory, or perhaps as an elaborate apology for becoming exactly the kind of man she'd prayed he wouldn't become. The distinction mattered less than the result. Vincent Ferraro was untouchable, unbreachable, and utterly alone. His organization operated like a Swiss watch. Sebastian Romano handled day-to-day operations with the efficiency of a Fortune 500 CEO. Dylan Russo managed security with the paranoia of a former federal agent. Marcus Costa oversaw financial operations with the discretion of a Vatican accountant. Each man knew his role, his boundaries, and the consequences of exceeding either. Vincent spoke little because words were currency, and currency should never be wasted. When he gave instructions, they were followed without question or clarification. When he made promises, they were kept absolutely. When he made threats, they became prophecy. The collapse had come without warning. One moment Vincent was reviewing acquisition reports in his office, the next he was on the floor, his body convulsing while Sebastian shouted for an ambulance. The irony wasn't lost on him. After surviving 2 attempts on his life, 3 federal investigations, and countless enemies who'd tried to bring him down, he was being defeated by his own biology. Now he drifted in and out of consciousness, in a hospital room that cost more per night than most people earned in a month, surrounded by doctors who spoke in careful euphemisms about complex systemic failure and unprecedented symptom clusters. They were expensive, these specialists, and thoroughly useless. Vincent had always been able to buy solutions. Need a judge? There was a price. Need evidence to disappear? There was a price. Need a competitor to reconsider their position? There was always a price. But no amount of money could purchase an answer to what was killing him, and that realization was almost worse than the dying itself. He thought about his mother during the long nights when sleep wouldn't come. Maria Ferraro had believed in redemption, in second chances, in the possibility that even her dangerous son might find a way back to grace. She'd been wrong about many things, but Vincent hoped she'd been right about that. In the darkness between medical procedures and consultant visits, Vincent found himself wondering if this was how his story was meant to end, not in a blaze of violence or a federal courtroom, but fading away inch by inch, while machines counted his heartbeats and Sebastian managed his empire with increasing confidence. The vulnerability he'd spent decades hiding was finally exposed, and Vincent Ferraro, who had never been afraid of any man, discovered he was terrified of becoming nothing more than a name on a headstone and a cautionary tale told in whispers. The night shift at Manhattan General moved with the rhythm of a sleeping city, quieter footsteps, dimmed lights, and conversations reduced to whispers. Ava had been working these hours for 2 years, long enough to recognize the subtle changes that marked different stages of darkness. 3 a.m. was when the hospital truly belonged to the invisible people. She entered room 4247 with her usual efficiency, cartwheels squeaking softly against the polished floor. Vincent Ferraro lay motionless under Egyptian cotton sheets, his breathing supported by machines that hummed with quiet authority. The room smelled of expensive cologne, fresh flowers, and something else, something metallic that didn't belong in a space this meticulously maintained. Ava began her routine, emptying trash bins and wiping surfaces with practiced movements. But her eyes, trained through years of forensic observation, began cataloging details that the medical team had missed or dismissed. Vincent's fingernails showed a peculiar yellowing at the cuticles, not the ordinary discoloration of age or illness, but something more specific. She'd seen similar patterns in her toxicology cases, victims of certain heavy metal exposures that presented subtly before becoming catastrophic. His hair, what she could see of it against the white pillowcase, showed irregular thinning. Not the symmetrical baldness of genetics or chemotherapy, but patchy loss that suggested follicular damage from an external source. She moved closer, adjusting her cleaning supplies to get a better view. The metallic smell grew stronger near the nightstand. Ava's pulse quickened as she recognized it, the distinctive odor that her professors had taught her to associate with thallium compounds. Odorless to most people, but detectable to those who knew what to look for. She'd encountered it twice in her career, both times in cases where someone had tried to commit the perfect murder. She glanced at Vincent's hands, noting the subtle tremor in his fingers even while unconscious. His gums, visible when his mouth fell slightly open, showed a characteristic grey line that could easily be mistaken for poor dental hygiene. But Ava knew better. These weren't symptoms of an unknown illness. They were a textbook presentation of chronic heavy metal poisoning. The expensive lotion bottle sat exactly where Sebastian had placed it that morning, its elegant label facing the bed. Italian import, promising skin rejuvenation and cellular repair. Ava studied it without touching, noting how the consistency visible through the glass seemed slightly different from standard cosmetic products. Thicker, with tiny particles that caught the light. Her heart raced as the pieces assembled themselves. Someone was slowly poisoning Vincent Ferraro, and they were using his own vanity and trust against him. The daily application of contaminated lotion would deliver consistent doses while appearing completely innocent. No one would suspect a grooming product, especially one personally recommended by someone Vincent trusted. But suspicion wasn't proof, and proof required action that could cost Ava everything she'd rebuilt. She finished cleaning methodically, her mind racing through possibilities. Going to the medical staff would require admitting how she knew about toxicology symptoms, exposing her past and probably her current identity. Hospital security would likely dismiss her as a delusional employee. And if Sebastian really was behind this, confronting him directly would put both her and Lily in danger. As she prepared to leave, Vincent's eyes suddenly opened. For a moment, they stared at each other, the feared crime boss and the invisible cleaning woman. His gaze was sharp despite his condition, intelligent and calculating even in weakness. "You see something," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, but carrying absolute authority. Ava froze, mop in hand, realizing that Vincent Ferraro had been watching her observe him. He'd noticed her noticing, caught her cataloguing symptoms that his expensive doctors had overlooked. She started, then stopped. This was the moment that would define everything. Her sister's future, her own safety, the life of a man she'd been taught to fear. "What do you see?" Vincent asked again, and Ava understood that he already knew something was wrong. He just needed someone brave enough to tell him the truth. She looked into his eyes and made the choice that would change everything. "I think someone is poisoning you," she whispered. Vincent's eyes never left Ava's face as her words hung in the air between them. The admission had cost her something. She could feel it in the tremor of her voice, the way her hands gripped the mop handle like an anchor. "Sit down," he said quietly. Ava glanced toward the door, calculating escape routes. "I should go, my shift." "Sit." The word carried the weight of absolute command, but without threat. Vincent gestured weakly toward the leather chair beside his bed, the same chair where Sebastian spent hours managing phone calls and paperwork. She remained standing, but set down her cleaning supplies. "The yellowing in your fingernails, the asymmetrical hair loss, the metallic smell, it's consistent with heavy metal poisoning, probably thallium. It's almost undetectable in standard blood work, and the symptoms mimic a dozen other conditions." Vincent studied her with the intensity of a man who'd built his life on reading people's intentions. "You know about poisons." It wasn't a question. Ava nodded reluctantly. "I used to work in toxicology before I ended up here." "Who?" The single word carried layers of meaning. Vincent wanted to know who was poisoning him, but also who had driven her from toxicology to night shift janitorial work. Ava understood that her answer would determine whether she walked out of this room alive. "I think it's the lotion," she said, indicating the bottle on the nightstand. "Someone's been very careful, very consistent. Daily exposure through skin absorption would be almost impossible to detect." "Who brings it?" Ava's mouth went dry. Accusing Sebastian Romano was essentially signing her own death warrant, but staying silent meant watching Vincent die slowly while his killer inherited everything. Sebastian. Every morning, same time, same placement. He positions it so the label faces you. Vincent's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, the look of a predator recognizing it had been prey. 15 years, he murmured, more to himself than to her. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the mechanical breathing of medical equipment. Ava waited, understanding that Vincent was calculating possibilities, weighing trust against survival. "What's your name?" he asked finally. "Ava Giordano." Dr. Ava Giordano, I assume, the woman who disappeared after the Morrison case. Her blood chilled. Of course Vincent would know about that scandal. His organization probably had files on half the forensic professionals in the state. I know you found something you weren't supposed to find. I know they destroyed your career for it. And I know you're working night shifts to put your sister through college." The thoroughness of his knowledge was both terrifying and oddly reassuring. If Vincent wanted her dead, she'd already be gone. Instead, he was establishing the parameters of a negotiation. "I need proof," he continued. "Real evidence, not just symptoms and suspicions. Can you get me that?" Ava thought about the independent lab across town, the one that would test anything for the right price. She thought about the $700 such a test would cost, money she'd been saving for Lily's next tuition payment. "Yes, but it will take time and it won't be cheap." "Money isn't a problem, time might be." Vincent's breathing grew labored as he spoke. "If you're right, Sebastian's been planning this for years. He won't wait much longer. Why trust me? You don't know anything about me." Vincent's smile was sharp, despite his weakness. "I know you had the chance to let me die quietly and collect whatever Sebastian might have paid you for silence. Instead, you told me the truth when it would have been safer to walk away. In my experience, that kind of integrity is rarer than intelligence." The weight of his words settled over her. Vincent Ferraro was offering her something more dangerous than money. He was offering her relevance, purpose, a chance to use skills that had been buried under shame and necessity. "If I do this," she said carefully, "if I help you prove Sebastian is poisoning you, what happens to me afterward? You become someone under my protection. You and your sister both. No one touches you, no one threatens your family, and no one questions your credentials when you decide to return to the work you were meant to do." It was salvation wrapped in danger, security purchased with complicity. Ava looked at Vincent Ferraro, dying, betrayed, but still commanding, and realized she'd already made her choice the moment she'd spoken the truth. The next 72 hours transformed Ava's understanding of power and its hidden costs. Vincent's protection came with invisible threads that wrapped around her life like silk restraints. She still reported to her cleaning shifts, still pushed the same squeaky cart through hospital corridors. But now Dylan Russo watched from the shadows. Vincent's head of security was a compact man with careful eyes who positioned himself where he could see every entrance to whatever room Ava occupied. "He's there for your safety," Vincent explained during one of their carefully orchestrated conversations. "Sebastian can't know we're onto him, which means you're still vulnerable until we have proof." The protection felt simultaneously comforting and suffocating. Ava had lived invisibly for 3 years, moving through the world without leaving ripples. Now she felt observed, catalogued, valuable in ways that made her skin prickle with unease. Vincent's world operated by different rules, and she was learning them in real time. Dr. Evan Falcone proved to be an unexpected ally. The young resident had noticed Ava's medical knowledge during casual conversations and showed genuine curiosity about her background. When she carefully mentioned her interest in toxicology cases, he offered to help her access medical databases after hours, no questions asked, just professional solidarity between someone who belonged in the hospital and someone who should have. "The system logs won't show anything unusual if you use my credentials," Evan explained, sliding a temporary access card across the break room table. "Just don't do anything that gets us both fired." Madison Conti, the night shift nurse supervisor, remained friendly but distant. Ava sensed that Madison understood more about hospital politics than she let on, navigating the space between patient care and administrative pressure with the skill of someone who'd learned to survive in institutional hierarchies. When Ava asked subtle questions about VIP patient protocols, Madison's answers were helpful but carefully neutral. "Rich patients get different treatment," Madison said simply. "Better rooms, private doctors, family members who think they know medicine better than we do. You just smile, do your job, and try not to get caught in their drama." The hardest part was watching Sebastian Romano continue his daily routine. Every morning at precisely 8:15, he arrived with coffee, fresh flowers, and the imported lotion bottle that Ava now understood was a murder weapon disguised as skincare. Sebastian's performance was flawless, the devoted friend tending to his dying mentor with touching dedication. Ava forced herself to maintain normal interactions with him. When he nodded politely as she cleaned around his chair, she nodded back. When he thanked her for keeping Vincent's room spotless, she managed appropriate responses, all while knowing that the man expressing gratitude for her work was slowly killing the person she'd sworn to protect. The psychological strain was exhausting. Ava found herself jumping at unexpected sounds, scrutinizing every hospital employee who entered Vincent's wing, wondering if Sebastian's paranoia about discovery might lead him to eliminate potential threats. The $700 she'd withdrawn from her savings account felt heavier than money should, representing both hope and desperation. Vincent himself remained a study in controlled vulnerability. During their brief conversations, always disguised as routine room maintenance, he demonstrated the strategic thinking that had built his empire. He asked precise questions about timelines, evidence collection, and chain of custody procedures. But Ava also caught glimpses of something else, genuine fear, not of death itself, but of dying without knowing who had betrayed him and why. 15 years, he repeated one night, when Sebastian's routine had been particularly tender, adjusting Vincent's pillows and checking his medication schedule with fatherly concern. "I gave him everything: position, respect, a future." Ava understood that Vincent's wound went deeper than poison. Sebastian hadn't just tried to kill him, He'd murdered the trust that had been Vincent's one remaining vulnerability. In a world where everyone wanted something from him, Sebastian had been the exception, the person whose loyalty Vincent never questioned. Now Vincent was learning to question everything, and Ava was discovering that being trusted by someone dangerous was its own form of captivity. The sample collection had to be perfect. Ava spent 3 days planning the operation with the precision of a military campaign. She needed enough of Sebastian's lotion for comprehensive testing, but not so much that its absence would be noticed. She needed to do it when Sebastian wasn't present, but also when Vincent could provide witness to the chain of custody. Most importantly, she needed to accomplish it without triggering the hospital's security protocols or Dylan Russo's protective instincts. Vincent participated in the planning with the focused intensity that had once coordinated business operations across 3 states. Despite his physical weakness, his mind remained sharp, tactical, and utterly ruthless when necessary. "Sebastian arrives at 8:15 every morning," Vincent said during one of their whispered conferences. "He stays until 10:30, then leaves for lunch meetings. He's back at 2:00 for afternoon visits, gone by 5:00. Your best window is the morning gap. What about the medical staff? Dr. Mancini does his rounds at 10:45. I'll handle Mancini. Chest pains, difficulty breathing. Something that requires immediate attention and privacy." Ava studied his face, noting the way Vincent treated his own medical crisis as a prop in a larger performance. "You're risking your health to help me collect evidence. I'm risking my health every day that Sebastian walks free." Vincent's voice carried no self-pity, only calculation. "The question is whether I die as a victim or as someone who fought back." The intimacy of conspiracy had created an unexpected bond between them. Ava found herself looking forward to their conversations, not just for the strategic planning, but for the rare glimpses of the man beneath the reputation. Vincent spoke about his mother sometimes, about the small apartment where she'd raised him, and the dreams she'd harbored for his future. He'd disappointed those dreams spectacularly, but he'd never stopped trying to honor her memory in ways that mattered. "She worked night shifts too," he said one evening as Ava organized her supplies. "Came home exhausted, but always asked about my homework. My friends. Made sure I understood the difference between survival and dignity. You think she'd approve of what you became?" Vincent considered the question seriously. "No, but she'd understand why. And she'd want me to survive long enough to become better." The boundaries between them remained clear despite the growing trust. Vincent never asked about Ava's personal life beyond what affected their collaboration. Ava never presumed to offer opinions about Vincent's past choices or future plans. They were allies by necessity, connected by shared purpose rather than affection. But Ava began to see past the fearsome reputation to the calculating intelligence underneath. Vincent's legendary control wasn't psychopathy. It was the discipline of someone who'd learned early that emotional displays were luxuries he couldn't afford. He'd built his empire by making hard choices quickly and living with the consequences absolutely. "You're not what I expected," she admitted during one late-night conversation. "What did you expect?" "Someone crueler. More. Obvious." Vincent smiled, and for a moment Ava glimpsed what he might have been in a different life. Cruelty is inefficient. Violence is expensive. Fear works better when people respect the source. The preparation for sample collection intensified their partnership. Vincent provided detailed intelligence about Sebastian's habits, his emotional patterns, his likely reactions to various scenarios. Ava contributed technical expertise about evidence preservation and testing protocols. Together, they constructed a plan that would either prove Sebastian's guilt definitively or alert him to their investigation. "If this goes wrong," Vincent said the night before their operation, "Sebastian will move quickly to finish what he started. There won't be time for second chances." Ava nodded, understanding the stakes completely. "If this goes right, what happens to Sebastian?" Vincent's expression became unreadable. "Justice. My way." She didn't ask for clarification. Some boundaries were meant to be respected, and Ava was learning that survival in Vincent's world required knowing when not to seek answers. She'd agreed to help prove a poisoning, not to judge the consequences that would follow. The next morning, As Sebastian left for his lunch meetings and Vincent began his carefully orchestrated medical emergency, Ava prepared to cross a line that would make her either Vincent's most valuable ally or Sebastian's next target. The sample had been collected perfectly, 3 milliliters of Sebastian's imported lotion extracted with surgical precision and delivered to the independent laboratory within hours. Now came the waiting, and with it, the growing sense that their investigation had attracted unwanted attention. Ava first noticed it in small details that accumulated like symptoms of a disease. Her work assignments changed subtly. Suddenly, she was cleaning areas farther from the VIP wing, scheduled for shifts that overlapped less frequently with Vincent's care schedule. When she asked Madison Conti about the changes, the nurse supervisor's explanation felt rehearsed. "Hospital efficiency review," Madison said, not meeting Ava's eyes. "We're optimizing cleaning routes to reduce redundancy." The explanation might have been plausible if Dylan Russo hadn't mentioned similar anomalies in security protocols. During one of their brief, carefully neutral encounters in the hospital corridor, Dylan indicated with subtle hand signals that surveillance cameras in Vincent's wing were experiencing technical difficulties during specific time windows, always coinciding with Sebastian's visits. Vincent himself was growing stronger, a fact he concealed with the skill of a lifetime actor. The reduction in poison exposure was having its effect, but he continued performing the role of a dying man with convincing authenticity. Only Ava could see the calculation returning to his eyes, the strategic mind reassembling itself as toxins cleared from his system. "Someone's asking questions," Vincent told her during what appeared to be a routine room cleaning session. "My business associates have been contacted by people claiming to represent my interests, trying to renegotiate existing arrangements." Sebastian doesn't have authority to renegotiate anything, but someone's convinced him he will soon. The implications chilled Ava. If Sebastian had partners in his betrayal, their small conspiracy was already compromised. The careful planning, the evidence collection, the gradual exposure of truth, all of it might be known to people who had resources that dwarfed anything Vincent could deploy from a hospital bed. The laboratory results arrived on Thursday morning through Evan Falcone's encrypted email account, a security measure that proved prescient. The findings were unambiguous. The lotion contained thallium sulfate at concentrations that would be lethal through cumulative skin absorption. The report included molecular analysis, chain of custody documentation, and expert testimony that would hold up in any court. But when Ava attempted to access Evan's computer that evening to print physical copies, she discovered that his hospital system access had been suspended pending an internal investigation into unauthorized database usage. The timing wasn't coincidental. "They know," she told Vincent that night, her voice barely audible above the mechanical sounds of medical equipment. "Someone's been watching our communications, tracking our access patterns." Vincent's response was a single word that carried decades of experience with betrayal. "Who?" The question had haunted Ava since discovering Evan's suspension. Their operation had involved only 4 people: herself, Vincent, Dylan, and Evan. She trusted Vincent because their survival was mutually dependent. She trusted Dylan because Vincent trusted him. She trusted Evan because he'd seemed genuinely helpful, curious about her background without pressing for details. "Evan asked me a lot of questions about my toxicology experience," she said slowly, pieces falling into place with horrible clarity. "Personal questions, about why I left the field, what cases I'd worked on." "Dr. Evan Falcone," Vincent said, and Ava heard him accessing mental files. "Young resident, ambitious, medical school loans probably totaling $250,000. Perfect recruitment target for someone who needed inside information about hospital operations." The betrayal cut deeper than professional disappointment. Ava had allowed herself to believe that someone in the medical establishment respected her expertise, valued her contribution despite her current circumstances. Instead, Evan had been gathering intelligence for Sebastian's conspiracy, monitoring their investigation while pretending to assist it. "How long do we have?" she asked. "Until Sebastian realizes we have the evidence? Not long. Until he decides to eliminate witnesses." Vincent's smile held no warmth. That depends on how confident he is in his other protections. As if summoned by their conversation, Sebastian Romano appeared in the doorway. His usual composed expression showed subtle cracks, the slight tension around his eyes, the way his hands remained hidden in his coat pockets, the measured pace that suggested controlled urgency rather than casual visiting. "Good evening, Vincent. Miss." Sonny paused, looking at Ava with new interest. "I'm sorry, I don't believe we've been properly introduced." "Ava?" she said simply, continuing to dust surfaces with hands that refused to tremble. Ava, such a lovely name. Sebastian moved closer to Vincent's bed, his positioning deliberate and territorial. "You know, Vincent, I've been thinking about hospital security lately. Amazing how much information moves through these corridors. Patient records, visitor logs, even staff communications. A man could learn everything he needed to know just by asking the right questions to the right people." The threat was elegantly delivered, wrapped in conversational politeness, that made it more chilling than direct intimidation. Sebastian was announcing that their investigation had been compromised, while demonstrating his control over the situation. Vincent met Sebastian's gaze steadily. "Information is valuable, but it's only as good as the source." "True, which is why I always verify my sources carefully, multiple perspectives, cross-referencing, independent confirmation." Sebastian's smile was razor-thin. "For instance, I learned some fascinating details about our cleaning staff tonight. Background checks are so revealing, don't you think?" Ava felt the walls closing in. Sebastian knew about her toxicology background, her involvement with Vincent, probably her role in collecting the evidence that could destroy him. The question was whether he planned to eliminate the threat immediately or orchestrate something more subtle. The answer came when Sebastian withdrew a familiar bottle from his coat pocket, the imported lotion, but somehow different, more viscous, with an odor that carried metallic undertones even through the sealed container. "I brought Vincent's evening treatment," Sebastian announced, his voice carrying false cheerfulness. "Double strength, for faster healing." The hospital board meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. in the executive conference room on the 38th floor, a gleaming space of glass and steel where medical decisions intersected with financial realities. Dr. Charles Mancini had called the emergency session to address what he diplomatically termed irregularities in VIP patient care protocols. But everyone understood the real agenda. Vincent Ferraro's case had become a liability that threatened the institution's reputation. Ava wasn't supposed to be there. Her cleaning duties never extended to executive floors, and the board meeting was strictly limited to department heads, senior administrators, and select medical staff. But Vincent had orchestrated her presence through a series of subtle manipulations that demonstrated his understanding of institutional power even from a hospital bed. "Maintenance emergency," Madison Conti had explained to the security desk, showing work orders that appeared legitimate, but had been fabricated through Vincent's remaining connections in the building. "Water damage in the conference room storage closet. Needs immediate attention." Dylan Russo had positioned himself in the adjacent hallway, ostensibly reviewing security protocols, but actually providing surveillance and protection. The pieces were moving according to Vincent's design, but Ava understood that they were walking into a trap that Sebastian had been preparing for days. The conference room filled with medical establishment power, Dr. Mancini presiding with corporate authority, department heads arranged around an Italian marble table worth more than Ava's annual salary, hospital administrators armed with charts and legal documents. Sebastian Romano sat at the far end, not officially part of the meeting, but present as Vincent's business representative to address any decisions affecting his medical care. "Mr. Ferraro's case presents unique challenges," Dr. Mancini began, his voice carrying the practiced neutrality of someone delivering unpleasant news to powerful people. "Despite extensive testing and consultation with leading specialists, we've been unable to identify the source of his systemic deterioration. The family has expressed concerns about our diagnostic capabilities." Dr. Sarah Chen, the hematologist, opened a thick file. "Blood work shows no evidence of infection, genetic anomalies, or autoimmune responses. Imaging studies reveal organ stress but no structural damage. Toxicology panels have been negative for all standard substances. Have you tested for heavy metals? Ava asked from her position near the storage closet, her voice cutting through the medical jargon like a blade. The room fell silent. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward the cleaning woman, who had just challenged the medical expertise of Manhattan's most prestigious hospital staff. Dr. Mancini's expression shifted from surprise to outrage. "Excuse me, this is a closed meeting." "Specifically thallium," Ava continued, stepping forward with the confidence of someone who had nothing left to lose. "Thallium sulfate presents with exact symptoms Mr. Ferraro has exhibited: hair loss, nail discoloration, gastrointestinal distress, neurological symptoms. It's almost undetectable in standard toxicology screens." Sebastian's face remained perfectly composed, but Ava caught the subtle tightening around his eyes. He was calculating, measuring threats, preparing responses. But he couldn't stop her now without exposing himself. "Who are you?" demanded Dr. Whitfield, the neurologist. "Dr. Ava Giordano, former senior researcher at Hartwell Institute for Forensic Sciences, specializing in toxicological analysis of suspected poisoning cases." The words felt strange after 3 years of invisibility, but also liberating. "I've been observing Mr. Ferraro's condition during my work in the hospital, and his symptom presentation is classic for chronic thallium exposure." The room erupted in whispered conferences. Medical professionals who had spent months pursuing exotic diagnoses were suddenly confronted with a possibility they'd overlooked. Dr. Mancini struggled to maintain control of the meeting while processing the implications of a cleaning woman possessing advanced medical knowledge. "This is highly irregular," he began. "What's irregular is 15 specialists missing an obvious poisoning diagnosis," Ava interrupted. She reached into her work bag and withdrew a manila envelope. "Independent laboratory analysis of a sample taken from Mr. Ferraro's personal care products. Thallium sulfate concentration, consistent with intentional contamination." Sebastian stood slowly, his movement drawing attention away from the damning evidence Ava was distributing around the conference table. "This is a serious accusation. Where exactly did you obtain this sample?" "From the imported lotion you bring to Mr. Ferraro's room every morning. The one you position so carefully on his nightstand. The one you've been using to poison him for months." The accusation hung in the air like a detonation. Board members stared at Sebastian, then at the laboratory reports, then back at Ava. The evidence was compelling, but Sebastian Romano wasn't someone who could be accused lightly in a room full of people who understood the consequences of crossing Vincent Ferraro's organization. Sebastian's response was perfectly calculated: shock, outrage, wounded innocence. "This woman is clearly disturbed, making wild accusations against someone trying to help his dying friend. It's despicable." "The evidence speaks for itself," Ava said, but she could see doubt creeping into some faces. Sebastian was a respected figure, well-dressed and articulate. She was a former scandal subject working as hospital cleaning staff. The institutional bias was predictable. Dr. Mancini seized control. "Security will escort this person from the building immediately. These accusations are completely inappropriate for—" The conference room doors burst open. Dylan Russo entered with purposeful stride, followed by 2 men in expensive suits carrying briefcases. Behind them, supported by a wheelchair, but very much alive and alert, came Vincent Ferraro himself. "Gentlemen," Vincent said, his voice carrying across the room with quiet authority, "I believe you're discussing my medical treatment. I thought I should participate." The transformation in the room was instant. Board members who had been dismissing Ava's evidence suddenly gave Vincent their complete attention. Sebastian's carefully constructed composure cracked as he realized his victim had not only survived, but had orchestrated this entire confrontation. Vincent's eyes found Sebastian across the conference table. 15 years of trust, partnership, and shared history collapsed into a single moment of absolute understanding. The betrayal was complete, the evidence undeniable, and the reckoning had begun. "Sebastian," Vincent said quietly, "we need to talk." The truth exploded across the conference room like shrapnel from a carefully placed bomb. Sebastian's composure disintegrated as Vincent's presence transformed the dynamic from medical consultation to criminal tribunal. The board members, doctors and administrators who moments earlier had been debating diagnostic protocols now found themselves witnesses to something far more dangerous than hospital politics. "Vincent," Sebastian said, his voice carrying forced steadiness, "you should be resting. This stress isn't good for your recovery." "My recovery." Vincent repeated the words with bitter precision. Interesting phrase from someone who's been ensuring I wouldn't have one. Dr. Mancini attempted to regain control of his conference room. "Mr. Ferraro, this meeting is about medical protocols, not whatever accusations are being made here. Perhaps we should—" "Dr. Mancini." Vincent's voice cut through the administrator's nervous diplomacy. "You've had 15 specialists examine me for 3 months. None of them thought to test for the most common murder weapon in toxicology textbooks. Either your medical staff is incompetent, or someone made sure they weren't looking in the right direction." The laboratory reports circulated among board members with increasing urgency. Whispered consultations erupted as medical professionals processed evidence that indicted not only Sebastian, but their own diagnostic failures. The liability implications were staggering. If Vincent Ferraro had been poisoned under their care while they treated phantom illnesses, the lawsuits would bankrupt the institution. Ava watched the room's dynamic shift as institutional self-preservation replaced professional curiosity. These people weren't concerned with justice or truth. They were calculating damage control for their careers and the hospital's reputation. Her role as whistleblower was about to become a liability that needed management. Sebastian played his final card with the desperation of someone who understood that exposure meant death. "Vincent, you're not thinking clearly. The medication, the stress, you're imagining conspiracies where there aren't any. This woman has obviously manipulated you, fed you paranoid fantasies about people who care about you." 15 years, Vincent said, his eyes never leaving Sebastian's face. 15 years I trusted you with everything. My business, my health, my life. You sat in hospital chairs worrying about my condition while slowly killing me with your own hands. You were never supposed to— Sebastian caught himself, but the partial admission hung in the air like a confession. Vincent smiled, and Ava felt the temperature in the room drop. This wasn't the weakened patient she'd been helping for weeks. This was the man who had built an empire through strategic thinking and absolute ruthlessness. The vulnerability had been real, but underneath it lay something harder and more dangerous than any poison. "I wasn't supposed to what, Sebastian? Survive? Figure it out? Or were you planning to let me die slowly while you positioned yourself to inherit everything I built?" The accusations that followed painted a picture of betrayal that went far beyond attempted murder. Sebastian had been systematically undermining Vincent's business relationships, spreading rumors about his declining mental state, positioning himself as the inevitable successor to men who valued stability over sentiment. The poisoning wasn't just murder. It was a hostile takeover disguised as tragic illness. But as the truth emerged, Ava began to understand that Vincent's anger wasn't directed solely at Sebastian. His eyes found her across the conference room, and in them she saw something that chilled her more than Sebastian's threats: calculation. She was no longer his secret ally, but a public witness whose knowledge made her valuable and dangerous in equal measure. "Dr. Giordano," Vincent said, using her title with deliberate emphasis, "has provided invaluable assistance in exposing this conspiracy. Her expertise and courage saved my life." The words should have felt like vindication, but Ava heard the subtle threat underneath. Vincent was acknowledging her publicly, which meant she could never return to invisibility. She was now part of his world permanently, whether she wanted to be or not. Dr. Mancini cleared his throat nervously. "Mr. Ferraro, we'll need to contact law enforcement, conduct a formal investigation." "No," Vincent said simply. "You won't." The finality in his voice reminded everyone exactly who they were dealing with. Vincent Ferraro didn't rely on police investigations or court proceedings to address betrayals. He had his own methods for dispensing justice, and they were considerably more efficient than the legal system. Sebastian began backing toward the conference room door, his confidence finally cracking. "Vincent, we can work this out. All these years together, everything we built—" "Everything I built," Vincent corrected. You were just holding the tools. Dylan Russo moved to block Sebastian's exit route with casual efficiency. The message was clear. This confrontation would end when Vincent decided it should end, not before. But Ava had seen enough. The evidence was public. Sebastian was exposed, and Vincent was clearly capable of handling the situation without further assistance from her. She'd done what she'd promised, provided proof of the poisoning, and helped save his life. Now she wanted to return to her small, safe existence before Vincent's gratitude became another form of imprisonment. "I should go," she said, gathering her cleaning supplies with hands that trembled slightly. "My shift. Dr. Giordano stays," Vincent said without looking at her. "We have more to discuss." The words hit Ava like a physical blow. She'd helped Vincent because it was right, because watching someone die slowly while their killer pretended friendship was unconscionable. But she'd never agreed to become permanently entangled in his world of violence and retribution. "I saved your life," she said quietly. "That was the agreement. I don't want anything else from you." Vincent turned to face her fully, and Ava saw that the vulnerable patient was gone entirely. In his place sat a man who owned people the way others owned furniture, completely and without question. "You know too much to walk away," he said simply, "and I protect what belongs to me." Ava walked out of Manhattan General that night, knowing she would never return as a cleaning woman. The confrontation in the conference room had shattered more than Sebastian's conspiracy. It had destroyed the careful invisibility that had protected her for 3 years. Vincent's public acknowledgement of her role meant that everyone from hospital administrators to street-level criminals now knew who she was and what she'd done. There was no going back to anonymity, no returning to the safety of being overlooked. The apartment in Queens felt smaller when she arrived home at dawn, her cleaning uniform folded neatly in a bag she would never need again. Lily was asleep on the fold-out couch, medical textbooks scattered around her like fallen leaves, a half-finished biochemistry paper glowing on her laptop screen. At 22, Lily still believed the world rewarded intelligence and hard work with success. Ava envied her that innocence. She sat in their tiny kitchen drinking coffee that tasted like borrowed time, watching sunrise creep across the city skyline and wondering what Vincent Ferraro's protection actually meant. Dylan Russo had driven her home in silence, his presence both reassuring and ominous. 2 men in expensive suits now stood on the street corner below her apartment window, their positions chosen to observe anyone approaching the building. Vincent had moved quickly to establish security, but Ava understood that protection and imprisonment often looked identical from the inside. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Your employment at Manhattan General has been terminated effective immediately. Final paycheck and benefits information will be mailed. Thank you for your service. Human Resources." The message was bureaucratically polite and utterly expected. Hospital administrators weren't stupid. They understood that keeping someone with Ava's knowledge on staff was a liability they couldn't afford. Dr. Mancini had probably signed the termination paperwork before the conference room cleared. But 15 minutes later, another message arrived from a different unknown number. "Your consulting contract with Ferraro Enterprises begins Monday. Salary, $150,000 annually. Benefits package attached. Report to the 32nd floor of the Ferraro building at 9 a.m. Management." Ava stared at the phone screen, calculating the transformation of her circumstances with scientific precision. The salary was more than triple her hospital wages, enough to secure Lily's education and their apartment for years. The consulting contract legitimized her role in Vincent's organization while providing plausible cover for their ongoing relationship. It was generous, logical, and completely non-negotiable. She was being purchased with elegant efficiency. Lily emerged from the bathroom, hair wet from the shower, already dressed for her morning classes. "You're home early," she observed, then noticed Ava's expression. "What's wrong?" "I got a new job," Ava said carefully. "Better pay, different kind of work." "That's wonderful. Where?" Ava hesitated, understanding that her answer would drag Lily into a world where truth was dangerous currency. But secrecy was worse. If Vincent's enemies decided to leverage family connections, Lily needed to understand what she was part of. Ferraro Enterprises, corporate consulting, toxicology expertise for mass business applications. Lily's face brightened with genuine excitement. Ava, that's incredible. You're going back to real science, real work that matters. I'm so proud of you. The enthusiasm in her sister's voice was almost unbearable. Lily saw redemption where Ava saw entrapment, professional vindication where Ava understood the price of Vincent's gratitude. But perhaps that was another form of protection, allowing Lily to believe in normal explanations for abnormal circumstances. Over the following days, Ava discovered what it meant to exist in Vincent's orbit, without his immediate presence to mediate the experience. The Ferraro building occupied a full city block in Midtown Manhattan, its glass and steel facade reflecting corporate respectability, while housing operations that generated wealth through methods never documented in annual reports. Her office on the 32nd floor was larger than her apartment, furnished with the understated luxury that marked serious money. The title on her door read, Director of Chemical Analysis, and her official responsibilities involved consulting on industrial safety protocols and environmental compliance. The reality was more complex. Dylan Russo briefed her on security procedures with military precision. Marcus Costa, the organization's financial officer, explained her salary structure and benefits package as though she were a Fortune 500 executive. Other employees treated her with respectful distance that suggested they understood exactly who had arranged her employment and why. But Vincent himself remained absent, recovering from his poisoning while orchestrating Sebastian's fate through intermediaries. Ava found herself managing an organization's toxicology needs without direct contact with its leadership, building authority through expertise rather than proximity to power. The work was intellectually stimulating in ways she hadn't experienced since her university research days. Industrial clients brought complex chemical analysis problems that required creative solutions and sophisticated equipment. She had access to laboratory facilities that exceeded anything she'd used at Hartwell Institute, staffed by technicians who respected her knowledge and followed her recommendations without question. Gradually, Ava began to understand that Vincent had given her something more valuable than employment. He'd restored her professional identity. The consulting work was legitimate, challenging, and increasingly essential to the organization's operations. She was rebuilding expertise and reputation simultaneously, becoming someone whose knowledge had value independent of her connection to Vincent's personal crisis. But the absence of direct communication with Vincent created its own tension. She didn't know what had happened to Sebastian Romano, though the man had simply disappeared from hospital visits and business meetings without explanation. She didn't know whether Vincent's recovery was complete, though Dylan's report suggested he was resuming normal activities. She didn't know what long-term expectations Vincent had for their professional relationship, though her contract extended 3 years with automatic renewal clauses. Most unsettling, she didn't know whether Vincent considered her debt paid or just beginning to accrue interest. The answer came on a Thursday afternoon when Ava was reviewing chemical analysis reports in her office. Her assistant announced a visitor, and Ava looked up to find Vincent Ferraro standing in her doorway, impeccably dressed and apparently restored to full health. He looked around the office with satisfaction, noting the equipment, the organized files, the evidence of work being accomplished efficiently. "You've done well here," he said simply. "The consulting work is interesting," Ava replied carefully. "I'm not talking about the consulting work." Vincent moved to the window, studying the Manhattan skyline with the expression of someone who owned significant portions of what he surveyed. "I'm talking about what you've built: authority, respect, independence." Ava waited for clarification, understanding that Vincent rarely spoke without purpose. "Sebastian is dead," he said without turning from the window. "Heart attack. Very sudden, very convenient for everyone involved." The euphemism was elegant and terrifying. Ava didn't ask for details about how Sebastian's heart had been encouraged to fail, or who had administered the encouragement. Some knowledge was more dangerous than ignorance. "You saved my life," Vincent continued. "But more than that, you showed me something I'd forgotten, that integrity isn't weakness, and that some people can be trusted because they choose to be trustworthy, rather than because they're afraid to be otherwise." He turned to face her directly, and Ava saw something in his expression that she hadn't expected. Gratitude without possessiveness, respect without ownership. "Your contract includes a termination clause," he said. 90 days notice, full severance, non-disclosure agreement with financial incentives. If you want to leave, build something completely independent, I won't stop you. The protection remains permanent regardless. For the first time since entering Vincent's world, Ava felt she had choices rather than obligations. The offer of freedom was genuine, which made the decision to stay entirely her own. The foundation was Vincent's idea, but he asked Ava to design it. "Maria Giordano Memorial Foundation for Healthcare Workers," he said, sliding the incorporation papers across her office desk 6 weeks after Sebastian's convenient heart attack. "Full endowment, independent board, permanent funding for education and emergency assistance. I want you to run it." Ava studied the documents with growing amazement. The foundation's assets were substantial enough to support hundreds of healthcare workers annually, providing scholarships, emergency loans and professional development opportunities for people whose dedication exceeded their compensation. The mission statement emphasized dignity for invisible workers, orderlies, technicians, cleaning staff, and others whose contributions kept medical institutions functioning. "Why my mother's name?" she asked. Vincent was quiet for a long moment, his expression revealing the calculation that preceded every significant decision. "Your mother spent 30 years as a nurse at Brooklyn Methodist. Night shifts, double shifts, overtime when other people called in sick. She saved lives that never made headlines, helped families during their worst moments, and died with $10,000 in savings because she spent everything on other people." The accuracy of his knowledge shouldn't have surprised Ava. Vincent had probably researched her family history more thoroughly than she knew it herself. But understanding that he'd taken time to learn about Maria Giordano, to recognize her sacrifices and honor them publicly, meant something deeper than gesture or manipulation. "She would have liked you," Ava said softly. "No," Vincent replied with certainty. "She would have been terrified of me, and she would have been right to be. But she would have appreciated what we're trying to build here." The foundation represented more than charitable giving. It was Vincent's attempt to transform their relationship from creditor and debtor into partners in something constructive. Rather than simply rewarding Ava for her loyalty, he was creating an institution that reflected values they both understood: protecting people who protected others, supporting those whose work was essential but undervalued. Ava threw herself into the foundation's development with enthusiasm that surprised her. The consulting work at Ferraro Enterprises provided intellectual stimulation, but the foundation offered purpose. She interviewed potential scholarship recipients, reviewed emergency assistance applications, and coordinated with medical schools to identify students who needed support. Each case reminded her of her own struggles, her mother's sacrifices, Lily's determination to succeed despite financial limitations. The Foundation's first major project was establishing a toxicology fellowship program at Manhattan General. The irony wasn't lost on Ava. She was creating opportunities for young scientists to pursue the career that had been stolen from her. In the same hospital where she'd worked as cleaning staff, Dr. Mancini accepted the fellowship funding with professional enthusiasm that carefully avoided acknowledging their complicated history. "Remarkable how much has changed in 6 months," Dr. Mancini said during the Foundation's launch ceremony, his words carrying layers of meaning that everyone understood, but nobody addressed directly. From crisis to opportunity, from questions to answers. The ceremony itself was a study in careful choreography. Hospital administrators, medical professionals, and Foundation board members gathered in the same conference room where Ava had accused Sebastian of poisoning Vincent. The transformation was complete. She now stood at a podium wearing designer clothing and speaking about healthcare worker advocacy to an audience that hung on her every word. Vincent attended but remained in the background, his presence felt rather than announced. He'd recovered fully from the poisoning, his health and authority restored, but he seemed content to let Ava command the spotlight. When reporters asked about his motivation for founding the program, his answers were brief and redirected attention to the Foundation's mission: Healthcare workers save lives every day, he said simply. This foundation makes sure they get the recognition and support they deserve. The real conversation happened later, in Vincent's penthouse office after the ceremony guests had departed. The space overlooked Manhattan from 58 floors up, offering a view that reminded visitors of the distance between street level and this rarefied altitude. But Vincent had changed how he used the space. Gone were the intimidating power displays, replaced by comfortable seating and personal touches that made the office feel less like a fortress. The fellowship program was brilliant, he told Ava, as they reviewed foundation paperwork. They're establishing credibility with the medical community while creating opportunities for people like you. People like me. Smart, dedicated, screwed over by institutional politics. Vincent's smile carried bitter experience. Every industry has them. People with talent who made the mistake of challenging the wrong authority at the wrong time. Ava understood that Vincent was describing his own journey as much as hers. His empire had been built by recognizing overlooked talent, by finding people whose skills exceeded their opportunities and giving them platforms to succeed. The foundation was simply a legal version of recruitment strategies he'd used for decades, but their partnership had evolved beyond mutual utility into something approaching friendship. Vincent sought her opinions on business decisions unrelated to toxicology, valued her analytical thinking about complex problems, and treated her insights as essential rather than advisory. Ava found herself looking forward to their meetings, appreciating his strategic intelligence and dry humor about human nature. The shift was subtle, but significant. Where once Vincent had commanded and Ava had complied, now they collaborated. Where once protection had felt like constraint, now it felt like partnership. Vincent had kept his promise about freedom. Ava could leave at any time with his blessing and continued security. That knowledge transformed staying from obligation into choice. The foundation's success brought unexpected benefits. Medical professionals who had dismissed Ava as a disgraced researcher now sought her expertise on toxicology cases. Universities invited her to guest lecture on forensic chemistry. Professional journals solicited articles about detection methods for exotic poisons. Her reputation was being rebuilt on foundations more solid than her original career. Lily's graduation from the biomedical sciences program provided the culmination of everything Ava had worked toward. Her sister stood on stage receiving her diploma, knowing that graduate school was fully funded through foundation scholarships. The pride in Lily's eyes when she looked toward Ava in the audience was worth every risk, every compromise, every sleepless night spent navigating Vincent's dangerous world. After the graduation ceremony, the three of them, Ava, Lily, and Vincent, shared dinner at an expensive restaurant that Vincent had reserved entirely for the occasion. Lily asked intelligent questions about the foundation's work, expressed genuine gratitude for the educational opportunities, and treated Vincent with respectful curiosity rather than fear. She saw him as her sister's successful business partner, not as the dangerous man whose empire operated according to rules that existed beyond legal boundaries. "She's going to be extraordinary," Vincent told Ava, as they watched Lily animatedly discuss her graduate research plans. Intelligence, drive, and principles, dangerous combination in the right circumstances. "Like her sister?" Ava asked. Vincent considered the question seriously. "Better than her sister. You had to rebuild yourself after the world tried to destroy you. She gets to start from a position of strength." As the evening concluded, and Vincent arranged for Lily to be driven safely home, he turned to Ava with an expression that carried weight beyond casual conversation. "I have something to show you," he said simply. The drive took them back to Brooklyn, to a neighborhood that had changed dramatically since Vincent's childhood, but still carried traces of its working-class roots. They stopped outside a modest building that had been completely renovated. Fresh brick, new windows, professional landscaping that suggested significant investment. "The first Maria Giordano Community Health Center," Vincent announced. "Free toxicology testing, health screenings, and medical consultations for people who can't afford private health care. Opens next month." Ava stared at the building, reading the bronze plaque beside the entrance that honored her mother's memory. This wasn't gesture or manipulation. This was Vincent using his resources to create something meaningful, permanent, and genuinely helpful. "Why?" she asked. "Because some debts can only be repaid by doing better," Vincent said simply, "and because your mother would have wanted this." The threat came from an unexpected direction, disguised as legitimate business and wrapped in legal authority. Ava was reviewing foundation grant applications when Marcus Costa arrived at her office with the kind of controlled urgency that marked serious problems requiring immediate attention. Behind him walked a woman in an expensive suit carrying federal credentials that identified her as Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Hayes, Southern District of New York. "Dr. Giordano," Hayes said, settling into a chair without waiting for invitation. "I'm investigating irregularities in the death of Sebastian Romano and your role in the events preceding it." The ambush was professionally executed. Hayes had bypassed Vincent's lawyers, avoided formal notification procedures, and arrived during normal business hours when Ava would be accessible and unprepared for federal interrogation. The message was clear. The government was opening a new front in their eternal war against Vincent Ferraro, and Ava had become a target. "I'm not sure what you're referring to," Ava said carefully, understanding that every word would be analyzed for evidence of criminal conspiracy. Hayes opened a file thick with documents, photographs, and transcripts. "Sebastian Romano died of sudden cardiac arrest 6 weeks after you publicly accused him of poisoning Vincent Ferraro. The medical examiner found no evidence of foul play, but the timing is interesting, particularly given your expertise in substances that can simulate natural death." The accusation was elegant in its implications. Hayes was suggesting that Ava had not only identified Sebastian's poisoning, but had eliminated him using her toxicological knowledge, making her an accessory to murder rather than a whistleblower exposing attempted murder. The federal prosecutor was turning Ava's greatest strength, her scientific expertise, into evidence of criminal participation. Mr. Romano's death was investigated by qualified medical professionals and determined to be natural causes, Marcus Costa interjected, his tone carrying the measured authority of someone accustomed to federal scrutiny. "Natural causes that benefited your organization considerably," Hayes replied. "Sebastian Romano was Vincent Ferraro's designated successor. His death cleared the path for alternative leadership structures." Ava understood that she was witnessing prosecution strategy in real time. Hayes wasn't interested in Sebastian's death specifically. She was using it as leverage to flip witnesses in a larger case against Vincent. Ava's knowledge of the poisoning plot, her access to Vincent's organization, and her scientific credibility made her valuable as either cooperating witness or defendant. "What do you want?" Ava asked directly. Hayes smiled with the satisfaction of someone whose strategy was proceeding according to plan. "Cooperation. Testimony about Vincent Ferraro's business practices, his methods of handling internal threats, his instructions to you regarding Sebastian Romano's problem. In exchange, immunity from prosecution and witness protection for you and your sister." The offer was comprehensive and terrifying. Federal protection would mean disappearing from her rebuilt life, abandoning the foundation, surrendering the professional recognition she'd fought to regain, but refusing could mean indictment, trial, and conviction for crimes she hadn't committed but couldn't definitively disprove. "I need time to consider." "You have until tomorrow morning," Hayes interrupted. "After that, the grand jury gets very interested in expert witnesses who help solve poisoning cases and then see the subjects of their accusations die conveniently." After Hayes departed with bureaucratic efficiency, Marcus Costa remained in Ava's office with the expression of someone calculating complex odds against dangerous opponents. "Vincent needs to know about this immediately," he said, reaching for his secure phone. "No." Ava's response surprised them both. "I handle this myself." Marcus paused, studying her with new attention. "Federal prosecutors aren't hospital administrators. They have resources, legal authority, and institutional backing that makes them extremely dangerous opponents. They also have weaknesses," Ava replied, her mind already working through possibilities that toxicological training had taught her to recognize. "Hayes is fishing. She has suspicions but no evidence, threats but no proof." Otherwise, she wouldn't need my cooperation. The next 18 hours became a masterclass in strategic thinking that combined Vincent's tactical approach with Ava's scientific methodology. She didn't contact Vincent directly, understanding that any communication between them would be monitored and analyzed for evidence of coordination. Instead, she began assembling a defense that turned Haste's accusations into questions about prosecutorial competence. Ava started with the medical evidence. Sebastian's autopsy had been performed by Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, the city's chief medical examiner, an internationally recognized expert whose findings had withstood challenges in hundreds of criminal trials. Dr. Morrison's report detailed comprehensive toxicological analysis that found no evidence of external substances contributing to Sebastian's death. But Ava went further. She contacted the independent laboratory that had analyzed the poisoned lotion, requesting detailed documentation of their testing procedures and results. She obtained hospital records showing Sebastian's medical history, including previous cardiac incidents and family history of heart disease. She assembled a scientific case demonstrating that Sebastian's death was not only explainable by natural causes, but was actually predictable given his medical profile. The Foundation's Toxicology Fellowship program provided unexpected assistance. Dr. Sarah Chen, now serving on the Foundation's advisory board, offered professional support that carried significant credibility. When Ava explained the federal investigation, Dr. Chen's response was immediate and decisive. "This is harassment," Dr. Chen declared. "Your expertise saved Vincent Ferraro's life and exposed a genuine attempted murder. If prosecutors want to criminalize competent medical analysis, they'll find significant opposition from the professional community." The support multiplied quickly. Hospital administrators who had initially been embarrassed by their diagnostic failures now defended Ava's intervention as exemplary citizen action. Medical school professors praised her forensic methodology in academic journals. Professional organizations issued statements supporting whistleblowers who exposed healthcare crimes. But Ava's most powerful weapon was the Foundation itself. The Maria Giordano Memorial Foundation had awarded scholarships to 43 healthcare workers in 6 months, provided emergency assistance to dozens of families, and funded research that was already producing published results. The Foundation's beneficiaries included prosecutors' relatives, judges' children, and politicians' constituents. Hayes arrived the next morning expecting surrender, and found instead a conference room filled with medical professionals, legal representatives, and Foundation supporters, whose presence transformed the federal investigation into a public relations disaster. Dr. Morrison attended as an expert witness, prepared to defend her autopsy findings. Dr. Chen brought documentation, proving that Ava's poisoning diagnosis had been scientifically sound. Marcus Costa presented legal briefs challenging the investigation's jurisdiction and methodology. "Dr. Giordano's actions were exemplary," Dr. Morrison stated for the record. "She identified a sophisticated poisoning that medical professionals had missed, provided evidence that saved a life, and cooperated fully with appropriate authorities. Criminalizing that behavior would discourage future whistleblowing in healthcare settings." Hayes found herself defending prosecution decisions to a room full of people whose expertise exceeded her own. The case she'd constructed around timing and suspicion crumbled when confronted with medical evidence and professional testimony. Worse, the investigation was attracting media attention that portrayed federal prosecutors as harassing a healthcare advocate whose foundation was providing tangible community benefits. "The investigation into Mr. Romano's death is closed," Hayes announced with professional dignity that barely concealed her frustration. "Thank you all for your cooperation." After the federal representatives departed, Ava remained in the conference room with her supporters, understanding that she'd just experienced something extraordinary. The Foundation hadn't just provided legal protection, it had created a community of advocates whose collective influence exceeded Vincent's traditional methods of handling government pressure. Vincent arrived as the room emptied, his expression carrying satisfaction mixed with something approaching pride. "Impressive," he said simply. "You turned their strength into weakness and made enemies into allies." "The Foundation made that possible," Ava replied. Community support carries different weight than individual power. Vincent nodded slowly, recognizing that Ava had achieved something his organization rarely accomplished, defeating federal investigation through legitimate means, using truth and transparency rather than intimidation or corruption. Hayes will try again, he said. Federal prosecutors don't abandon targets easily. Let her try, Ava replied with newfound confidence. I'm not hiding anymore. 5 years later, Ava stood at the podium of the American Association of Forensic Sciences annual conference, looking out at an auditorium filled with colleagues, students, and professionals whose respect she'd earned through work rather than reputation. Her presentation was titled Invisible Toxins, Invisible Victims, Recognizing Poisoning in Institutional Settings, and it drew from research that had revolutionized diagnostic protocols in hospitals across the country. The case study she presented, though carefully anonymized, was Sebastian Romano's attempted murder of Vincent Ferraro, a perfect example of how sophisticated poisoners exploited institutional blind spots to avoid detection. Heavy metal poisoning remains one of the most underdiagnosed conditions in modern medicine, Ava explained to the rapt audience. Symptoms mimic common illnesses, standard tests often miss exotic compounds, and victims are frequently dismissed as hypochondriacs or drug seekers. The key is recognizing patterns that others overlook. She clicked through slides showing the diagnostic markers that had first alerted her to Vincent's condition: the asymmetrical hair loss, nail discoloration, and subtle neurological symptoms that painted a clear picture for those trained to see it. The presentation combined academic rigor with practical application, offering medical professionals tools to identify cases that conventional wisdom would miss. In this particular case, Ava continued, the poisoning was conducted over months through contaminated personal care products. The delivery method was brilliant in its simplicity: daily skin absorption of thallium compounds disguised as luxury grooming items. The perpetrator had medical knowledge, intimate access to the victim, and perfect cover for his presence. The questions that followed were intelligent and engaged. Young forensic scientists asked about detection methodologies. Hospital administrators inquired about implementing screening protocols. Medical school professors requested permission to use her research in their curricula. Ava answered each question with the confidence of someone whose expertise had been tested in the field and proven reliable. After the presentation, she was approached by Dr. Rebecca Martinez, director of the Centers for Disease Control's Toxicology Division, who offered a collaboration that would have seemed impossible during Ava's years as hospital cleaning staff. Your work on institutional poisoning is exactly what we need, Dr. Martinez explained. We're developing national protocols for detecting exotic toxic exposures in healthcare settings. Your foundation's research would provide the practical framework. The Maria Giordano Memorial Foundation had grown beyond Vincent's initial vision into a nationally recognized institution. 3 community health centers now operated in underserved neighborhoods, providing free toxicology testing and healthcare services. The fellowship program had trained 47 specialists who were revolutionizing diagnostic standards across the country. Emergency assistance grants had supported hundreds of healthcare workers through personal crises. But the Foundation's greatest achievement was legitimacy. Ava had built an organization whose work was respected by medical institutions, funded by government agencies, and supported by professional associations. She'd transformed Vincent's gesture of gratitude into a platform for systemic change that improved healthcare for people who couldn't afford private medicine. Vincent attended her presentation, sitting in the back row with the same careful positioning he'd used throughout their partnership. He'd recovered completely from Sebastian's poisoning, his health and authority restored, but he seemed content to remain in the background while Ava commanded professional recognition. Their relationship had evolved into something neither had anticipated: genuine partnership between equals who complemented each other's strengths. The Ferraro organization had also transformed, though less visibly. Vincent's brush with mortality had clarified his priorities, leading him to legitimize operations that had previously existed in legal gray areas. The consulting work that employed Ava had expanded into a full industrial safety division that served Fortune 500 companies. Vincent was becoming, almost accidentally, the legitimate businessman his mother had always wanted him to be. After the conference concluded, Vincent and Ava shared dinner at a restaurant that would have seemed impossibly expensive during her hospital cleaning days. The conversation covered foundation business, professional opportunities, and personal updates with the comfortable familiarity of friends who'd survived dangerous circumstances together. The CDC collaboration could change everything, Vincent said, reviewing Dr. Martinez's proposal. National protocols, federal funding, institutional legitimacy at the highest levels. Your mother would be proud. She would be terrified, Ava corrected with a smile. All this attention, all these powerful people knowing my name. She preferred staying invisible. Smart woman. But invisibility wasn't sustainable for you. Ava considered the observation, thinking about the night shift cleaning woman who had noticed what 15 specialists missed, who had risked everything to speak truth to power, who had transformed vulnerability into strength through determination and intelligence. I learned something important from you, she said. Power isn't about controlling outcomes, it's about creating options. Vincent raised his wineglass in acknowledgement. What will you choose? The question carried layers of meaning. Ava's contract with Ferraro Enterprises had been renewed annually for 5 years. But both parties understood that her success had created independence that made continued employment optional rather than necessary. The foundation could operate without corporate backing. Her reputation could sustain private consulting work, and her expertise was valued by institutions that offered security without risk. I choose to stay, Ava said simply, not because I owe you anything, but because what we've built together works. The foundation helps people. The consulting work is intellectually challenging, and the partnership gives both of us resources we couldn't access independently. Vincent smiled with genuine satisfaction. Partnership. I like that word better than employment. Equal partnership, Ava clarified. I'm not your employee anymore, Vincent. I'm your colleague. The distinction mattered more than semantics. Ava had evolved from victim to ally to partner, earning influence through competence rather than accepting protection through dependence. She'd built authority that complemented Vincent's power, creating combined capabilities that exceeded what either could accomplish alone. Later that evening, they visited the original Maria Giordano Community Health Center in Brooklyn. The building buzzed with activity despite the late hour, night shift workers receiving health screenings, families accessing emergency services, students studying for medical exams in the library that had been added through foundation funding. Ava watched Vincent observe the center's operations with the satisfaction of someone whose investment had produced meaningful results. He'd used his resources to honor her mother's memory while creating institutions that served people like those Maria Giordano had dedicated her life to helping. She would have liked this, Ava said, watching a young mother receive free toxicology testing for lead exposure concerns. She would have liked you, Vincent replied, the person you became after everything fell apart, smart enough to see what others missed, brave enough to speak truth when it was dangerous, principled enough to demand something better. As they prepared to leave, Ava reflected on the journey that had brought them from hospital corridors to this moment. 5 years ago, she'd been invisible by necessity, surviving on the margins of a world that had discarded her. Now she stood as an equal partner with one of the most powerful men on the East Coast, respected by professionals who had once dismissed her, building institutions that would outlast both their lifetimes. The poisoning that had nearly killed Vincent had also saved them both, him from the isolation of absolute power, her from the diminishment of enforced invisibility. They'd discovered that redemption was possible through partnership, that strength could be rebuilt through mutual support, and that the best victories were those that created something lasting for people who needed it most. Walking out into the Brooklyn night, Ava Giordano and Vincent Ferraro moved forward together, no longer patient and protector, employer and employee, or savior and saved, but partners in building something neither could have imagined when she first whispered the truth about poison in a hospital room filled with expensive machines and dying hope. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought. See you in the next video.